stand there and go, where'd you go?
Towards Ryde.
Oh, that way.
There's a little park. So there's a tiny little shop within a little park, and there's a cafe in the park. Well, we just had a picnic lunch in the park.
It was cold yesterday, but it looks cold.
It is cold. I've got enough adipose on me.
Good.
I've got more.
You go to the park now. You go and play with the park. Stay under that spot.
Open in later.
Somebody else is up.
They said you could, if you wanted to or would like to stay, you could have a look on their website and on their stuff.
I had a salt and pepper, whatever it was.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, but it had about, 6 litres of salt and pepper and about 100 chips.
I went to the one inside the swimming pool. No, down one more level into the public swimming pool.
Oh, no. No. It's down this way. Where we got it. Oh, is it 1, 2 blocks down?
Three different.
Please explain how many.
This one in the park. You can see it inside. Yeah. Well, Jay's got his home. Yeah. What were they called? Did you have the card or that? So someone was, it was called behind the day lines around here. The actions and the was a bit considered one of the old ones. Yeah, that red one.
Well, Mary's here, that's all right.
I just start now.
You like to start? That's true. So would you like to just gather around a little bit so that we could chat for a moment? And I suppose the protocol is you tell your joke while the latecomers are out of the room so that... So when Lan was talking about the magic of the method and becoming a magician, I also remembered that some people take this work into doing magic with animals. So what do you call a dog magician?
Rough.
Talented touch.
A labracadabrador. Okay. Enough of that for the moment. Now, part of learning is doing things right, and part of learning is doing things not quite so right yet. And because this method involves putting our hands on other people, we're going to need feedback about the effect, the quality, the sensations of our touch and the way that we're going about working with each other. Now, in our culture, we're not well trained for either giving or receiving feedback. Most of us get a little bit anxious about the whole idea, You know, oh, they're going to tell me all the things I did wrong, and then I'll feel bad and less of a person and all that sort of nonsense. On the other hand, because, you know, we've been taught to be polite and kind, we can sometimes feel awkward about saying to somebody, I don't feel comfortable with what you're doing, or even more useful feedback about when you have your hand on me and you're trying to get yourself comfortable, my system feels agitated. I wonder if you could try getting yourself organised and then put your hands on. So we want to practice giving feedback in a way that's useful to each other, that allows us all to learn. And if we think about what is feedback, it's information that helps to steer where we're going so that we get where we want to be. And one of the most amazing kind of technological feedback systems that I'm aware of requires going off track in order to be able to get information about being on track. So many years ago, when they started sending rockets off to the moon, they'd launch these amazing things, a lot of fire and smoke, and you know, the moon would be sitting up here. And somehow they expected this great lump of metal to get from here to there and land precisely where they expected. Despite the fact that the Earth's spinning, we're all rotating around the sun, and there's all kinds of interference that happens between here and there. And so the way that the rockets navigate is by heading off where they think they want to go, and then after a little while they measure the difference between where am I and where's this kind of ideal line. And so if the rocket's actually on track, there's nothing to measure. But the further it becomes off track, the easier it is to sense that difference. And so the little machines inside adjust things and say, oh, you need to be going a bit more this way. And so it heads off that way for a little while, until there's enough error in the system to be able to measure the difference, and it corrects again. And it keeps correcting, usually getting smaller and smaller and finer distinctions until it arrives at the point that it wants to go. That's how we want to be able to use feedback in terms of refining the quality of our touch. I might have an intention to put my hand on somebody's pelvis and find out how in this person does movement move through to their head. I want to be able to know, am I on track? If there's a big dissonance between what I feel and what I see and the information that's kind of coming back, then it's really easy to adjust. That's definitely not it. If I push in that direction, it goes nowhere. If I try something different, then maybe I'm not quite so sure. Am I getting there or am I not? I can't quite tell. And that's probably a good sign, because it means this gap's a little bit smaller. And so feedback works best when we allow ourselves to have that gap between the ideal and the actual, because there's something to sense. But there are a number of other kind of characteristics which I will just remind myself of. Shall we get them all? It's easiest to benefit from this feedback when I have asked the question. So if I've kind of made a space in my brain ready for this information, if I know what I'm looking for, then it's going to be much more useful and much more easy for me to process and do something with. So if my question is, am I heading towards this person's head? That's a really clear question. If I ask myself, am I doing it right? That's not such a useful question. And if I ask the person that I've put my hands on, am I doing it right? They don't know, because they're students too. And they're not necessarily clear about what my intention is or what it should feel like yet. So if I can frame a question, then the feedback will have somewhere to land when I get it. It's the most mobile board. Okay. So often we think about feedback as something that is given before the person has even thought to ask a question. I want to give you some feedback about that. It's sort of different, isn't it? This morning, Zoran suggested that you take one idea into your ATM practice for the day or for the lesson and kind of stay with that as your main focus. And that's a bit like forming a question. How can I do this more smoothly? Or how can I use less effort? How can I find a way of staying engaged for longer? There are lots of different questions you can ask yourself that create this kind of receptacle for the information to come back and settle in. I'll encourage you when you practice with each other, when you start putting your hands on people, to likewise choose, what is it that I really want to practice today? Am I practicing being able to spread my attention to include both of us? Am I practicing keeping my pelvis free? Am I practicing sensing through the person? Am I practicing, what else might I be practicing?
Going in the same rhythm.
Same rhythm as the person?
Yeah.
Yep. So that may be pacing their breathing or sensing the kind of the natural oscillation rhythm when you push and they rebound into your hand again. What else could you be practicing?
Responses. Responses, like if you're pushing the leg, where's it going to?
So is that like
Where's it going through the body?
tracking where does the movement go to? Yep.
Timing.
Timing. Yep, we've talked about that in the past and we will talk about it much more. What kind of timing of my movement, of their response, of the sequence of movements makes sense in this system? What goes before what in the movement? What else can you think of?
Difference between how you hold yourself, you're holding yourself well, you know, your pelvis is loose,
Yep.
you're sitting correctly.
So your own organisation.
That makes a difference to how they move
Yep.
as well.
Yep, certainly if I have the ground, it's travelling clearly through, movement is travelling clearly through my skeleton, it's going to be a very different experience for the person who's at the end of my hands.
Pressure.
Pressure, yep. Okay, so we'll look for some more of those. So forming your question. So maybe even at the beginning of going into a practice session that you can say to your partner, I know I've got a lot to learn, but today what I really want to practice is this. Pushing. Shoving, grunting, yeah, whatever it is that that seems appropriate for today.
Sometimes the feedback kind of informs what becomes the theme as well.
Well, it can. You can try something with someone and ask perhaps what's standing out for you.
Yeah.
That we might choose as our theme for today. Yep. That will help you form your question. So the second point is feedback is more effective when it's about my experience. So if I've engaged in an action, movement, and I've asked a question, you can help me by talking about what effect that had on you. Okay, so this is the responder. So if I say my experience of that was, then I'm owning the feedback. I'm not saying, well, that was good, that was bad, that was too hard, too soft, too fast, too slow. If I can talk about my experience as the effect that it had on me was, because then when I, the practicer, go to the next person, I don't fall into the trap of thinking everybody's going to have the same experience as the previous person. I might say to you, I worked with somebody the other day and this is the experience they had. I'd really be interested to know what your experience is when I do this. Because you'll find that when you move from person to person, some people like very clear touch. Everybody likes clear touch. Some people like firmer touch. Some people like lighter touch. Some people like you to go faster or slower. It's going to be different with different people. So the feedback needs to be about the experience of the person giving it.
Judy, do some people need to be warned where you're going to touch them? Can you sort of, they're expecting you to touch their foot?
Yeah, so for the tape, the question is about, but warning people what you're going to do.
Not warning as in sort of, but just maybe give them some...
No, certainly...
what area you're going to.
Certainly anyone that has trauma associated with the reason that they're coming to you. People in pain. But in a way it's kind of politeness to check in with people. Is it okay if I put my hands here? Now if you ask that question every time you move your hands, it's probably going to get a bit tedious. But it can be a good practice to just quietly comment, so I'm now going to move to your shoulders or I'm now going to move to your feet, and get a sense of whether the person finds that helpful or idle chatter. And so again, you can ask, I'm interested in the effect of talking. Can you tell me, is it helpful for you to know where I'm going next? Or are you happy for me to just move around and touch whatever seems to work? Maybe we might get the microphone. There it is. Have to.
Same thing.
I'd say a lot of that has to do with how you first make contact with wherever you're touching. Like if you sneak up behind and touch them suddenly, then they're going to get a fright. but if your first touch is like, here I am, okay, now we're here, and then we do something, that's a different...
Yes, usually once you've established the relationship. But I do know people that have sensitivity to being touched in particular areas, and that comes out of their history and their experience. So maybe that would be something that you talk to people about before you start. Is there anything that would be helpful for me to know in terms of helping you feel safe? Is there anywhere you prefer that I don't touch? But it is something that you'll get a sense as you work with people.
What about men touching women?
It depends a little bit on the culture, and certainly in some cultures it's absolutely inappropriate. You've got to have somebody else in the room with them, their chaperone, or you've got to get special permission. But if you have the slightest concern, ask. Is it okay? This is the sorts of things that I'm going to do. Would you be comfortable with that? Would you be comfortable telling me if you're not comfortable? That's probably an important one to check as well. Okay? So, if I ask you for some feedback about what I'm doing, it's most helpful if it relates to what's just happened. It kind of seems obvious, but sometimes you'll ask somebody for a bit of feedback, and you'll find that what they really want to tell you about is something you said last segment that they haven't got over yet, or something that somebody else did, and it's not all that useful for learning. So if we can talk about the actions and the reactions that have happened in the recent time frame, that will be helpful. And the other one that's useful will what you say help me make finer distinctions? So if I say to you, when I move your pelvis this way, does it help you get a clearer sense of the connections of that movement through to your head? If you say, it's a bit hard, does that help me make a finer distinction? I could try backing off the pressure. I could try doing various other things. But if the intention of your response is to help me adjust what I'm doing so that I can narrow the gap between how far off the ideal I am and being able to get close to where I want to be, what kind of alternatives do you have for helping me make finer distinctions? Okay, here I am pushing through your pelvis. If I say something really unhelpful like, how's that for you? That might be the best effort I can come up with in the moment, because I've got a lot of things to think about. what kind of responses might help me make finer distinctions? Who's got the mic?
Maybe if you
Thanks, Pat.
Maybe if you move your angle to line up with the direction you're going, that might, let's see how that
Cool.
works.
Okay, so that'd be really nice. If you're feeling like the push is heading off in some other direction, you could suggest that I try coming more behind my hands, getting my weight behind the hands, see what difference that makes. Or simply, could you try a different angle, see if that helps. Okay, what else?
Be as specific as possible.
Be as specific about what?
As maybe as the person who's,
I guess it's a two-way street, so maybe be more specific about what you want to achieve.
Me as the questioner?
No, the other way around. So someone's practicing on you
Yep.
about what you're actually, okay, this is not getting anywhere, this is really irritating, can you maybe, you know, let's try and aim for this, let's try and go for my shoulder, or let's try and do that, so you try and be more specific.
Okay, so this is another category that we'll talk about in a minute, is when you haven't been asked for some nice helpful feedback, but what they're doing is not working for you. So hold that thought, and we'll come to it in a minute. Supposing I'm the practicer, and I've managed to ask a vaguely useful question, what kind of things might you say that helps me to make finer distinctions?
Just try slowing down.
Yep,
Try slowing down.
yep. That might help both of us sense more clearly. What else?
It might be that the pressure is too great in one hand than the other, and it might mean just back off a little bit on the right hand, maybe.
Yeah, okay, so try varying the pressure. Yep.
Do you have to make?
No, you shouldn't. You should have a go.
Maybe rather than, I probably wouldn't have an idea, so maybe I could just say something like, that, you know, my sense is that that's really light and tentative.
Great.
Maybe that's enough to say that.
Yep, that's the effect that it's having on me. So here's my experience of what you're doing. And I mean, the implication is I'm not really quite sure what your intention is. So we might say, I'm not sure what your intention is. I can't clearly sense that.
Rather than come up with the idea about how to improve it.
Yep, you mightn't know how to improve it, but being able to give feedback as I'm not clear about what you're doing, then me as the practicer, I can come back and say, oh, okay, maybe I'm not clear about what I'm trying to achieve or what I'm trying to ask. Can I clarify and refine my question? And so I can pause and think, all right, I want you to feel that when your pelvis moves, your head moves too. So let me try it in a different direction. Let me try it harder, softer, slower, faster.
And then you can say that seems clear.
Well, then I can ask you, can you feel your head moving when I move your pelvis? Bugger. Okay, can you think of any other examples of the sorts of things that we might say to someone that helps refine the intention or makes finer distinctions?
Maybe I'm more aware of where your hands are gripping rather than what they're...
Cool. Yep. So that's one of the things we'll be practicing, is how to send a clear intention without grabbing or tickling or doing distracting things with our hands.
What about asking them, how does your body pump?
Yep.
You know how in HMs, how does it feel touching the floor in this area? Could you ask them, how do you feel differently on the table now? Like, could you say, does your pelvis feel like it makes different contact?
Yep.
Could you?
Sure. And that's less about what I'm doing than the after effect of it. But you certainly will ask questions like that to help people become aware of the changes.
I would say if you're going to ask a question like that, it's in response to something that you've actually seen change, and you're seeing if they notice it too, rather than just random.
So that their leg goes out.
For something you observed, and just to see if they see it.
Does your
feel
pelvis feel flatter on the bench now? Say their leg went out.
Sure.
and
Okay,
relaxed.
and so that's again another category of helping people to notice what changes they've experienced. This is about how do we help each other become better practitioners. Okay, how do we give feedback as we're going through this learning phase of using touch to have a conversation? How can we help each other to ask clearer questions, to give clearer directions in a way that's useful for both of us in our learning process?
Can you use the positive?
That feels better. Oh, no, not that feels better. I can see what you're trying to achieve, or I can, I'm more aware of how I'm moving now. So you give a positive response.
Yep, and if you can relate it to what's just happened. So when you moved your hand so the heel of the hand was more in contact, I could sense it more clearly.
So immediate feedback about something they're doing.
Sure. Okay, so Deborah's concern about giving feedback when you haven't been asked for it.
Can I just ask, I'm a bit confused about this in the sense that you have to know where you're going as the practitioner. If you don't know where you're going...
You probably won't get there.
Do you know what I'm saying? That's it.
You know where you're going, Carol.
No, I don't know where I'm going.
No.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't. Sometimes we want to explore and see what options there might be. And so if I wasn't doing that with my hands, if I was doing it verbally, what words would I use? How would I form an exploratory question?
For someone else?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you might ask them how that felt. But what I'm saying is, when you're approaching to do an FI or to learn how to do an FI, how do we know, like we know what we're achieving within ourselves, how do we then know what we're trying to achieve with someone else?
A certain amount of giving a lesson is exploring to see what we're going to do next, what might be useful and what might be helpful and that sort of thing. If I didn't have hands, if I only had a voice, then I might be asking a question along the lines of, I wonder what happens if I suggest that you move in this direction. Have you considered moving this and this together? Does it help if you lift your head and your arm at the same time? Rather than, oh, I can see that you need to go here. So this is different from feedback. This is giving a lesson. Lessons are about using our hands and bodies to ask those questions in a somatic form, or to give those directions in a somatic form. If you don't know what you're doing and you haven't got an exploratory question, put your hands in your pocket.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Think for a little while, look for a little while. Remember back to other times. But I've watched many of my colleagues and other students kind of put their hands on people and confuse their systems for them. So if you're not ready to say something or to ask something, just wait. And then the clearer, even if it's a stupid question, I wonder what happens if, it's at least clear. And the person that you're touching may find an interesting answer. They may not. Right, well, not much. But in your practice sessions, if you then say to your partner, okay, I had no idea what I was looking for, I tried that to see what would happen, can you tell me what effect it had on you? And then the person on the floor or the table can come back and say, well, my experience was when you actually put your hand there and leant on me in that direction, I actually felt that my pelvis moved and something happened in my ribs that conveyed that message to my neck, but it sort of stopped there. Is that useful to know? Okay, that's how we learn. So that's the kind of feedback that's actually helpful, because it's about what's happening right now, it's about me, and it helps you make, well, it may or may not make finer distinctions, but at least it allows you to know that that's a useful question to ask, or it was at that point in time.
Because I saw you giving an FI to someone in Melbourne once, big guy, and big muscly guy, and he, and you were moving around and you really were, well, you looked like you were puzzled, but you obviously, it's part of the process. And
puzzling
because
is a
you
good
had
part of
been
the process.
asking him questions and he hadn't really been responding in any very helpful ways. And I loved your perseverance, because you just kept moving around, and you didn't put your hands in your pockets, but you did just sort of wait, and then, you know, within 10 minutes it was all sorted out, but it did take like quite a while to work out this,
yep.
you know, you probably don't remember this.
I do remember that one, actually.
So it was very interesting, because...
Yeah. And if that had been my first ever lesson, I probably would have gone into the corner and wept. Why can't this person sense what's blatantly obvious, you know? I can feel if I press through here, the movement goes. I can see it with my eyes, and he can't feel anything. So his feedback, both, well, his verbal feedback to me wasn't all that useful, except that it said to me, okay, I know there's something in there, I can see it and I can feel it, but I need to ask him a different question, or I need to create a different experience for him so that it comes into the range where he can detect something.
It's very interesting to observe, because I could see, as I said, once he made one or two sort of connections, you went straight in there, it was all sorted out, but initially it took him a long time to give any sort of feedback, and when he stood up it was fine, but it was a very
Can you feel
interesting
that?
process.
No. Can you feel that?
Yeah.
And, you know, we'll get days like that.
I'm all money like that.
I mean, that is feedback, and it means that I need to really pay attention to, am I being as clear as I possibly could be? Is there a different way that I could connect into his system that is on a channel that he's tuned into? Am I not well organised? You know, do I need to change the words or the action? So it's useful feedback, even if it's not the most pleasant. Depends on your mood of the day, whether you're in a kind of Indiana Jones, I'm ready for a challenge. Okay, I'll get in one way or the other.
But the amusing thing was we could see, we could see what you were doing.
Absolutely.
But he couldn't respond.
He couldn't sense it at that time. So that will happen. Pass the parcel.
things I find helpful when I'm with someone is to find out what they're there for, to actually ask them what they're there for, because you might have an idea of what you'd like to do, that you see that they may need something, and they've got a completely different plan. They might think, well, I want my shoulder fixed, and you've got some interest about connecting head to pelvis, and they're not interested in that. So you need to actually talk to them start with where they.
Sure.
It's all about them. It's all about.
Once you actually get out
and
into
then
practice.
you might be interested in head to pelvis or something, and then you have to connect that.
Well, then you have to start
Using
learning to be a storyteller.
Yeah.
So the reason I'm connecting your head to your pelvis, when you ask for something completely different, and that's another skill that you will practice further on. So, back to Deborah's concern.
I actually have another question.
Yep,
That was
okay.
my question actually, but I want to extend that a little bit. What happens if someone comes? What happens if somebody comes and they just feel generally out of sorts, and they're not quite sure what's wrong with them? And you go in there and you start playing around and you find there's no connection here or whatever, but then you find out it is something really specific, like it's a shoulder or something, and you haven't really addressed that. And then at what point does it say, you know, you're playing with something else, and then you turn around and you say, and they say, actually, while you're there, my shoulder's really bad. Can you start working on my shoulder? I mean, does that happen, or is it?
Yes, absolutely.
general as
And
much as
if you want the
specific?
answer,
Yeah.
you need to keep coming back for the next 3.5 years.
3.5 years. I wanna come back.
Okay, that's really what you're here to learn. There is so much more than dealing with the shoulder or finding a bit or making a connection. It's all of those and a whole lot more. So right now we're not particularly talking about the public or people that you're going to work on out there. We're talking about working together in this room, and how do you help refine the skills of your colleagues to the point where in a year or two, if they happen to live near your cousin or your auntie or a friend, you would be happy to refer to them.
That's a good barometer.
Okay? The quality of the graduates of this program is your responsibility. We share this educative process. So
that was sort of my concern, is that yesterday was the first time I'd used touch on anyone else but myself to practice, so I wasn't exactly sure what I'd be looking for to formulate my question. I was a little bit anxious about that, thinking, oh, I'll just watch and then a question will come to me. I'm just not sure how that will happen. I'm not sure what to look for to help formulate the question.
We will provide quite a deal of guidance in what questions will be useful or what you might want to practice today. Now back to that question. I can. And not the exact words, but certainly the intent. When we're practicing together, sometimes someone will do something that doesn't feel real good. You know, it might be tickly, it might be messy, it might be too hard, it might be too fast, it might be unbearably slow. It might feel like they're sort of pressing you into the table rather than inviting movement to travel through.
And you feel their expectation. I like that. I felt sometimes that when someone touches me, that I'm feeling like they want my shoulder to be forward.
Okay, so you might feel that they want something to go somewhere that you don't feel you're organised to go with them. And they haven't asked for feedback. What are you going to do?
I've had a massage. And then I was like, I've had a couple, and I basically, right at the beginning, do you want it soft, do you want it hard? I thought, okay, that's great, you've asked me. I've had someone else come along. Unbearably soft the whole time. I was so embarrassed I didn't say a word. It was the most useless massage I've ever had, but I didn't open my mouth.
Yep.
And I've had the opposite where it's been so hard, it's been painful. And it's like, is that okay? And I'm like, yeah, it's great, you know. So it's hard to give that feedback if you're not.
Okay, and so this is a little bit different from massage. It's not, you know, do we like it hard or do we like it soft? It's, can I learn from this person's touch something that's useful in my system that allows me to be more of who I am or do something with a little more ease or elegance in my life? Because we're practicing together, we're learning together. What is that sound anyway? Is it somebody's alarm or watch or clock or phone?
It's like it's coming through from down that corner.
Oh, maybe the building should provide cake. Cake, yeah. Sorry. For the new people, we have had a practice that if your mobile phone is audible in the room, then you get to bring cake for morning tea. So, if somebody is working with me and they're trying to push me somewhere I can't go, or they're kind of really pressing hard and it's not in a way that allows me to follow that movement or that's causing me pain, then do I want them thinking that's okay and doing it to my cousin or my auntie or whatever? We got any martial artists here? What do you do when you've been thrown and held and had enough? Yep. Raise your hand. Slap the floor. Can we agree on a signal that you don't have to use a whole lot of words, but it just means, can you pause? We need to talk about this. That's always a good one. Okay, we're learning. Please come with a question that is at least is, I'm interested in how this is affecting you. And I would like to know at some point, particularly if it's not okay. If it doesn't feel good. Now, most of you have had an FI in your life, some of you several. You've had some experience of the quality of touch that actually feels pleasant. And you may well have had extraordinarily gentle touch and quite firm and vigorous touch. You might have had fast, slow, but there's a kind of a quality to it that feels okay, that you feel safe with it. If anything's happening to you and it doesn't feel good in that safe sense, please give a signal that hopefully alerts the person working with you that we need to talk. If you're the one with your hands on and somebody gives one of those little signals, please pause and say, what do I need to know? That's a really good question. What could help me make this an experience that you can stay in learning mode? Okay, sometimes we do need to encourage the doer to ask for feedback. Sometimes we need to say,